Afternoon, everyone. I'll restart, Kristen. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're happy to see everyone today. I think you can move on to the next slide. It's my first time doing the hosting, so you'll have to bear with me. So this slide is the trainings we've already done. These are the foundational trainings we did at the end of June. Those recordings are available on a website that I'm sure Kristen or someone else from ICF will share the link to. So if you haven't seen those, these are longer, more foundational trainings that we've done before. If you go on the next slide, we've, throughout this process and throughout these workshops, we've developed some tracks. These are the 2 tracks. As wherever there's a check mark, that's the training that we've already completed, and those recordings should be available to you. As you can see in the track 1, today's training is, the intentionality was to have it be more for frontline staff and supervisors, but we do think there's content here that is applicable for system leads and higher level folks as well. We have one more training in our track 2, which will be next week, which is the director for directors and supervisors. This is the one that we had to change the date on last week for incorporate underrepresented perspectives into your program. So the last one we'll be holding will be next week on the 4th. Go ahead. Here's the team. We'll have each of us. So I'll introduce ourselves. My name is Karen Kowal. I, she, they pronouns, and I work for an organization called Homebase, and I'm a directing analyst here. I've been here about a year, a little longer, but have spent a lot of time either directing programs or directing the homeless system. So I'll pass it on to Abby, since I think it might just be the 2 of us today.
It's just the 2 of us. We're so lonely without our teammates. My name's Abby. I use she and they pronouns interchangeably. I am consulting with Housing Innovations and ICF for this. And one of the authors of the Equal Access Rule. So it's quite special to me. Thanks, Karen.
Great. And Rodney or Chris may pop on during this, but we're not sure. So if you hear another voice, that's who it is. Let's go on to the next slide. So we have been showing some group norms during all of these trainings and workshops. And so these are just to, so we're all on the same page of how our expectations on how these will be conducted and how we want you to engage with us. I'll just give folks a minute to read through those. I think the one note is the last one. As we're presenting, sometimes we can't always respond to direct messages to us. We would encourage you to use the chat whenever possible. And if you have questions afterwards, feel free to contact ICF and they'll pass any of those questions on to us as well. And they do pass on any unanswered questions to us if we don't get to them during the Q&A. So if you move on to the next slide, now we'd like to hear a little bit about you. Those of you who've been with us for a few sessions know we like to just in the chat or out loud. If I don't know how many people we have here, 31. That's probably, you could do it out loud if you feel like it. Name, pronouns, community role, and then just a real simple question I hope everyone can answer. What's your favorite place? And that's real open. It can be whatever, however you interpret that. Give folks a minute to
He, hers, right?
things in the chat. So just to transition us into the content, I think I use this icebreaker not only because I find it fun. I like knowing where people, what favorite places people have, but I think also for our discussion today, it's really a starting point as we think about place and places we support and even create. So when you're, think back or think on your favorite place, like reflect on why that is your favorite place and why you return to it. Is it the location? Is it the people who are there? Is it the environment or the atmosphere? Is it because of the rules or the lack of rules that might be there? Is it how you feel when you're there, how you feel after you leave? So intentionality of that icebreaker is to get you thinking and why those places might be important to you. Go on to the next one. So here's our agenda today, what we hope to accomplish. So we're going to talk about physical security and congregated accommodations, focusing a little bit on shared bathroom, showers, and sleeping places. We want to talk about safe spaces, those that are brave, how we can empower folks in those spaces, a little bit on managing conflict, some about resilience and affirming care, and then the last session, someone had asked to talk a little bit about considerations of working with young people. So we're going to end with that today. And then next one. So I'm just about to pass it off to Abby. So we're going to start with physical spaces. We're going to have some emphasis, like I mentioned, on bathroom, showers, sleeping arrangements, but really when we're talking about physical space, it can be much broader than that. It's really any place that we interact with folks who are unhoused and coming to us for services. So I'll pass it over to Abby.
Anything else, I'll just say I got a little internet connection unstable note a second ago. So if I start getting wonky, yell at me, okay? And I can turn my video off so you can still hear me. Okay, so I really love that prompt because I think we in the homeless field, we don't always think about the impact that space has on us. But everything about a facility, from walking in and smelling, literally the difference between using straight bleach to clean and something with a fresh floral scent makes a huge difference. So every part of a space is really important for sending a message to the people walking through that door. So I'm going to go on to talk about reasonable accommodations and safety and privacy in the context of gender. But I do just want to talk about some more universal elements of physical space that are really important. Cleanliness and being free of critters is of utmost importance. Also, is anybody familiar with the concept of physical territoriality versus physical territory versus behavioral territory? Is this something that you all talk about? You can come off mute and say yes, so. Okay, I'm going to assume no. I'll talk about it a bit. So this is actually something that I studied and worked with people who lived on the street good 15.
Abby, you froze up on us.
Oh no, this is going to be bad, I think. Okay, I'm going to turn my video off. And hopefully that does the trick. The difference between physical territory and behavioral territory is one that's quite important for these congregate living spaces that many of us operate or work within. So physical territory is when you can clearly delineate this space is mine, that space is yours. I can lock this thing, I can't lock this thing. It's what can you physically control in a space? And the less that you can physically control in a space, the more you will behaviorally act territorial. So this is a concept that people think about for prisons, though it doesn't actually get enacted, but thinking about that experience of coming out of prison or being in, there is nothing that is yours. And that ends up coming out in a number of behavioral issues, like being aggressive or assertive about, pushing people out of spaces or trying to take over what is, ostensibly a public space and making it your own personal space. All of those behaviors happen when you don't have a space that you feel like it's yours. And so even if it's a congregate living space, having a more defined space, I love this, this image that Karen put in here of, the single cot that is bounded at least by those walls. Of course, this isn't a room. You really don't have visual privacy, but you at least can say, ratchet down the behavioral territoriality that comes up in congregate living. So I wanted to touch on that a bit. Some other things that I've seen over the years in congregate living spaces is a proliferation of signage of don't fill in the blank, no this prohibited, like very negative rules, not hi, take care of this space, but rather don't sit here after this time, don't put your feet on this, don't use the mats after X, Y, and Z time. And those no signage points really set a tone for the space that doesn't result in people necessarily feeling like it's a space that they are welcome, or that it's a space that they're being asked to mutually care for. It's instead, we have allowed you in here. You will behave in these ways or else. And so keeping that type of signage to a minimum also has a really important impact on, or a big impact on how people perceive that space and whether they have a place there. Another rule sort of issue that I see is that folks will use spaces in all manner of ways. And sometimes there will be a very egregious thing that happens that then becomes a rule for the next 20 years. In 1985, we had Robert, and he came in and he did this crazy thing. So now we don't allow X, Y, and Z in the common room. These things, if you see patterns, sure, it makes sense to set rules. But others, it just becomes a tighter and tighter program space that ends up being too inflexible. Obviously, the type of space dictates how much programming and rules or guidelines there need to be. But striking a balance and stepping back periodically to say, are these things that we have here actually helpful? Do we think this is still a problem? Or could we reframe this? Or could we take this sign down or remove this rule because we don't think actually anybody's doing this anymore? And the last thing is your facility is really a pit stop in most people's lives. They're going to stay there for a brief period of time. And there's a widespread kind of feeling that if it's quote unquote too comfortable, people won't leave. And I have not actually found that to be the case. as long as there is enough actual social programming in the facility, case managers working with people, helping them recenter in their resilience, either capitalize on a feeling of purpose or re-find a sense of purpose. That comfort is not the issue. Really, it is people believing that they can move to a different step or a different kind of life than they've been having. So those are more general, not so much about gender, but it obviously still applies. And if you can go to the next slide, Marion. So to think specifically about like this is where a lot of conflict comes up, or feelings of tension, or we're not sure what to do here. I just got another internet unstable. Can you hear me?
Abby,
can't
we can
Abby.
hear you, but you are cutting out just a little bit.
Oy. I am so sorry. If you need me to repeat anything, please come off mute and tell me.
Okay.
I'll hope to remain somewhat, that you can hear me. So showers, bathing, toilets, sleeping areas, these are all the areas where you are likely to receive accommodations requests or different accommodations requests, especially when these accommodations are segregated by gender. That usually happens when you have, let's say, a bathroom that somebody can't go in and lock and just be in there themselves. Anytime it's a shared bathroom, meaning multiple people can be in at once who aren't part of the same household, that this is when people start to have conflict. Now, it's not conflict just about gender. It's just conflict tussling about space and expectations of how you want to interact with the space versus how other people in the program want to interact with it. And so you'll often get these reasonable accommodations around those areas. Now, what is important when we talk about what we've been talking about, spaces of safety for LGBTQIA Two-Spirit plus folks? And that is that when you are providing accommodations, that you're not making any distinction between
Abby, I think we've lost you again.
God. Okay, what is the last thing you heard?
You were saying providing safe accommodations for people of LGBTQ Two-Spirit. Yeah, yes.
Okay. So the point with bathrooms and accommodation requests or accommodation style is that you don't make a distinction between whether somebody is cisgender or transgender in opening accommodations to people. Also, if somebody requests a reasonable accommodation, anybody can request that. You do not need to be cisgender. You do not need to be transgender. You don't need to identify as gay or lesbian or queer, whatever term applies to you. None of those identities are important to the question of who gets to use which bathroom. When reasonable accommodations come to you, it can be from anyone for safety or privacy needs. And as long as you are subjecting everybody to the same rule, then you accommodate as best you can. Now, that's not always going to work. And on the next slide, I'm going to go through all of the ways that you can offer reasonable accommodations. But the important point is that you don't do it for some and not others. Okay, so let's look at these options. Basically, these come down to schedules, having separate facilities, and then physical modifications. So what would an alternate shower schedule bathroom? And they're pit showers, and you have somebody who says, well, I actually start work at 6:30 a.m. So I'm gonna need to use the shower at 5 a.m. That is a reasonable accommodation request. Also, a reasonable accommodation request would be, I don't have anything that's taking me out of the shelter that I couldn't shower between 7 and 8, but I am really uncomfortable with exposing my body to other people. Also, a reasonable accommodation request, and you can accommodate that through a different shower schedule. If you're able to rotate the entire bathroom usage, that is also a possibility. If you are lucky enough to have a facility that has a separate single-use toilet or shower, single use being that it locks, and so just one person can be in there, you can offer those as well. I know that sometimes those are not possible. Again, that's okay, as long as it's not possible for everybody and not just some. You can also attempt some physical modifications to make the space work a little better for people. So let's say you have pit showers, just, you know, multiple heads in a big open room. Can you pay to put up partitions, like, you know, to have poles at the top that you hang shower curtains from to make it more accommodating and frankly more dignified? Pit showers are heinous, even for those of us who haven't stayed in a shelter before. I'm having flashbacks of
Abby, we lost you again at your flashback.
flashback of middle school bathrooms and locker rooms and how heinous that experience was.
Oh, okay.
So there's also, you can put doors on bathroom stalls that can be latched or locked. I know some people have said, well, we can't do that because we have folks using in the bathrooms otherwise. So you can change up the way that the door opens. So I was talking to somebody who operated a facility where they changed the doors to open toward the open space rather than into the stall, in case somebody OD'd, slumped against the door and they couldn't get it open, they could get it open in that way. So, you know, changing the hinge structure. So there are ways to get around, you know, drug use in the bathroom, and also create a more safe space for others who want privacy. Monitoring the space to make sure that, you know, if somebody says, I'm fine to use the restroom here, however, I'm worried about X, Y, or Z, this person harassing me, whatever it is, if you're able, you can monitor the entrance and exit of the bathroom just to make sure that nothing bad is happening. You can also set up cots in other rooms. You could put folks next to the night staff desk, like the bed that's closest. And again, these are all options for when people are asking for assistance, when people are asking for the reasonable accommodation. If you can go to the next slide, Marianne. So in practice, based on their identity or their appearance. So I have heard a lot over the years, oh, we have a separate room for trans women. We have a separate room for trans men. We have a separate room for non-binary folks. That is presupposing that somebody wants to be segregated into a room that is identified. And they may not want to come out. I mean, we've talked about the lengthy, often process of coming out or transitioning, and that you don't want to be on public display necessarily. The other thing is that sometimes accommodation requests can become a source of harassment. So I have heard a couple occasions of small women's shelters where they've hosted a trans client, and the cisgender women have taken it upon themselves to all ask for a different accommodation. Let's say, go back to the shower example, 7 to 8 a.m. we do showers, but there are 8 women and 1 woman is trans and the other 7 women ask for a different accommodation at another time of day. That is an example of accommodation requests being sort of ganging up, harassing the other woman in that program. You also want to be careful that you're not leaning too heavily on reasonable accommodations to get around the need to maintain a safe space in your
Hey, I think, Abby, that you are going out again. Karen, do you think you could take us into the large group discussion?
Sure. I think we're just gonna go on to the next slide. After hearing all of Abby's great information, you can actually take the slides down. We thought we'd just do open discussion. So in your experience or your project, have you been able to accommodate privacy requests? I'm gonna put this in the chat. So if you want to use the chat instead, but I think there's few enough to come off mute. Kristen, you actually just sent that just to me and not to everyone. If you want to resend it to everyone. But how have you been able to accommodate privacy requests? What's worked, what hasn't? Any thoughts about that?
And Marion, if we could take down the slides, and anyone who wants to come on camera, anyone who wants to answer, you can answer in the chat, or you can raise your hand or come off of mute. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, it's Christine Platt again. It's me, the talker. Because I don't actually work within a shelter, but I did after starting this homeless outreach program here in the city of Jackson, I actually applied for some additional funding and started a shower project. So one of the things that I really took into consideration when looking for the shower and the facility, like the actual shower I was going to use, was to make sure that 1, there were locking doors, obviously, but 2, that it was a full bathroom and that there were no gender specifications for those bathrooms. So both rooms in the shower trailer have a full bathroom and shower, and a full bathroom and shower. And I think that also creating the space where we congregate farther away from the trailer helps kind of give people some privacy, so that we're not really seeing or hearing what's going on in there. We play music to kind of mute any sounds so that people can have the opportunity to have that privacy. And if I had a shelter, I probably would do the same thing, but just as all I do is the shower project so far.
So that's great, Christine. So basically you didn't distinguish either of those showers / bathrooms as gender specific, right? So anyone can go into anyone.
Absolutely. And then taking the spot, because we do set up a canopy and chairs, and we have people who can come and do outreach from other organizations during those the hours of operation of the shower. I want to make sure to give some physical space between where people are congregating and where the actual shower is, so that they still feel like it's private, like we would in our own home, rather than having everyone like woo outside the shower while you're trying to clean. It just would make you feel very uncomfortable, you know. And so there was a lot of intention in how I structured that shower, the mobile shower project that I run.
Great. It's fantastic. Other people with thoughts or experiences about privacy?
I'm one of the fortunate ones that has 2 showers in 2 locations that actually locks. So where we end up, and the stalls have doors. But where we end up doing some shifting is, I think one of the examples earlier was with people who work at different hours than the shower times available. We of course make that work. And we also find that at times there are medical or hygienic reasons for doing that. For instance, if somebody is getting there's a couple of different treatments that one may experience where you need to shower so many hours from an application of some sort of medication. So of course we encourage that. If they say have an accident of some sort, biochem, it's like, it's not, you don't have to wait till 7 o'clock in the morning to go take a shower. Let's do it now. And, so what we've done is, even though we have these prescribed times, what we've done is done a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the evening, because some people like the evening, some people like the morning, some people feel like they want to shower before work, some people work, in a place that does, say, construction, where you get sweaty and dusty and everything, and they want to shower afterwards. So that allows that as well. But in order to do that, because of course myself and my manager isn't there 24/7, we have empowered the staff to make those decisions on a as needed basis, and actually encourage them to think about that. This is a basic human need, and if somebody needs that, let's make it happen.
That's great. It's great that the environment there is so open that people feel they can come and ask for those accommodations when they need them, right? Some places people feel like they can't ask for something when they really do need it. Any other thoughts about this one with privacy and accommodations we've had to make? Okay, had some great examples. Thank you all for sharing. If anyone thinks of anything else, feel free to use the chat too, or other comments or questions. Miriam, I think we can put the slides back up. So we can move on to the next one. So we really wanted to use a lot of this time to talk about creating safe spaces and practices. So, what is a safe space? And as we've been alluding to, it's really more than the physical space. It's really a social, cultural, and physical environments that are created. And they're created by what you see, what you hear, and how you're treated. So all those aspects are included. We put some, excuse me, Abby and I all have different technical difficulties today. So we put some questions up on the slide for people to think about and ask, when people are accessing services. If you're part of one of the first 2 trainings, we walked through some similar questions to think through someone's experience and concerns when they're in your project. So considerations about, as a reminder, first about safe spaces, don't just start and end at our front door when people enter. There are things we have to think about throughout the time that someone is staying with us. But often we find the easiest and simplest place to start is really looking at visible materials that can communicate that your place, that your location is a welcoming place or a safe space. So how do we do that? So I think one of the main ways is that we post signage about non-discrimination policies, or show that this is a welcoming environment. The images on the slide, for example, are from True Colors United. Those used to be things you could download and use if you need something, but there's lots of options for similar signage like this, but these are some of, I've been using this one for a long time. So it's things to post so people can see that you're inclusive, accepting, welcoming, that the space is safe. I think on a more personal level, what I often see is that staff at their desks often have signs or pictures or buttons or whatever that are affirming and are supportive. And when someone comes in, they look at that and they, can have that immediate sense of belonging. And so I think those nonverbal supports, when we can have them through signage or things on our desks, can be really important for people when they come in. Providing affirming resource pamphlets. So those are the things that people can just take when they want to, that they don't, feel like intimidated by looking at something and taking information or being called or being noticed for taking it. I think when we go back to intersectionality, like, are these pamphlets available in other languages for people who might need them? Other ways we can create safe spaces, like talking to people in your project about what transgender means, what it feels like to be disrespected, drawing parallels to people's experiences and treating everyone with all people with respect. Sometimes I think we make, like, I was talking about assumptions. Sometimes we make an assumption that everyone has known or met someone who's a transgender person, and that this can be a really problematic assumption, right? Like, I found even simple things like having the Ask Me My Pronouns button or sign is a great point of entry for someone who might not be comfortable with someone who's transgender to ask questions and to talk to someone who's an ally. So I think, we don't want to make assumptions that everyone's interacted with someone, with a different identity than their own. Training for staff and volunteers is a really important way to create a safe space. With that training, I would say making connections to the broader community. So sometimes we see in trainings that the local LGBT center is brought in to provide some local information or local perspective on things. When we're working with landlords, that we're connecting them and helping them understand the importance of non-discrimination and being inclusive. It's really important to be educating people in your project. I mean, I think sometimes people just bring a guest speaker in or another voice, either for a staff meeting or for a meeting with your participants or the people in your program. Even if it's just a small group, people really appreciate, like, a different voice, because they hear our voices all the time, and it's important to hear other ones too, and to make those connections. And the last one I wanted to highlight was modeling respectful behavior and language. I mean, I think we've touched on this throughout, but simple things like we've talked about, like starting with pronouns can help people feel comfortable, even if they don't like say that or you don't see that. It's something that makes them feel good that people are acknowledging different pronouns and that that's important. Sometimes I think also modeling in language, like sometimes we talked about last a little bit of like, when do we correct someone? Sometimes we don't have to call someone out or correct them when they make a mistake with someone's pronouns or someone's chosen name, but we can respond back with the right language and the right way to say it as a way to kind of softly be respectful and then use the language that is most appropriate. We can go on to the next one. So again, we didn't want to just talk about like having the right posters and images on your wall or just the right conversations. We think that we believe that safe spaces are created in all aspects of our programs. And this can even go down to the mundane forms, documents, policies, those things that we're giving people to fill out or sign when they come into our program. So so one simple thing to do is just review your forms and policies to ensure that they're welcoming and they have inclusive language. And some of this is really simple, and it's when we see it, we're like, oh, that's really intuitive, but then we don't see it on our own form. So like some some forms actually have a field where people can put the name, their chosen name, or the name they're preferred to be called. So, you know, I can call Christopher all the time, but if Chris really wants to be called Toph, like I would never know that unless like he either told me or I gave him a space to write that down. So it's important that we respect and honor what people want, even down to their names and their names. So having that in a form can be helpful. You know, having forms that include all kinds of gender identity, not just male or female, you know, maybe even having a blank instead of check boxes so people can write down what their gender identity is. So these are just simple things you could do on your forms to make them more welcoming and inclusive. We could do the same with sexual orientation if that's a field that you collect for your particular program. So on the slide on the right, which is probably pretty small, it might be hard to read, is an example of one anti-discrimination policy for the people who are in the program. So I think this is a really good example of having that inclusive and affirming language, but also it highlights really the culture and the safe space of this particular project, because it talks about if someone is acting abusive or oppressive, you know, what should happen or what's the process for that. So that's really clear and upfront for people, because sometimes people are in a project and they don't really know what to do when something happens. So this is a good form to make it simple and straightforward for people. So, you know, if you're looking for homework during these workshops, like one thing you can do is like really go back and read your policies and forms and look for places where your language can be more affirming and inclusive, and just start making those simple changes that can really help someone read something and feel like this is a place where they can belong and be supported. Let's go on to the next slide. So, you know, when Abby and I were preparing this workshop, we talked a lot about how to convey that the safe space isn't just about policies and signage. Like those are so tangible and those are things that we can easily change. But I mean, I think for us and our experience is really also about the atmosphere and the environment and how people feel in the space. And so, you know, the question is like, how do we know if our space is safe? Like even if we have the signs and even if we have all the right policies. So I wasn't really sure how to do this, but sometimes the best way to do that is to include a personal story, and that might be the best way to learn that. So I'm going to give a story from my own history. I was a director of an HIV housing project for a number of years, you know, and I'm not going to age myself to let you know how many, but the world was different then, and how we viewed safe spaces and gender equity and gender identity was certainly not the way that it is today. I will say that that safety and creating a safe space for people, in my opinion, my program was really central and ingrained in providing housing services for people with HIV, because of the stigma and discrimination people are still subjected to. So a culture of support in our housing program was critical. And it was also critical just because of the diversity of people that are living with HIV today, and we're seeing those in our programs. So at the time, my project may not have had the physical space, the signage, the policy aspects, and the detail that we're talking about this in this training. But I certainly believe we had the culture and environment that supported people to express themselves and thrive in our project. When Abby was talking about signage, it actually struck me that I had a staff person at that time that when I first started there, every Monday there would be a new sign up of a new rule. And so every Monday that came up over the weekend, there was a new sign and a new rule. And like every Monday I was taking down a sign of a new rule because that wasn't really the environment that we were trying to promote. So as I was the head of this, the director of this program, you know, I was always wanted to affirm that this was a place that was safe and welcoming, because we wanted everyone to be really successful. So I wanted to talk today about a person that I had the honor of knowing named Monroe. I've told this story in the past, so I just want to affirm that nothing in this account is counter to any information that Monroe has allowed me to say about them in the past. And I'm going to use they pronouns throughout because Honestly, it's been a while and I don't recall the pronouns they were using at the time. And second, because Monroe was able to explore their gender and their gender identity, and the pronouns Monroe was using, even when I knew them, changed frequently. So I just want to clarify that before going into this too far. So Monroe became homeless and came into our program because they left a mentally abusive relationship and had moved from North Carolina for that relationship. So they didn't have any support network or support system where we were currently living and working. So the other thing to know, Monroe was much younger than a typical person in our program at the time. They were under 25 when they entered, and most people that were in our project were over 45 and up to 60 or 65 years old. So there was a huge age gap between them two, which is, I would say that with any new transition or new place that someone's living, there's always an adjustment in that living arrangement. I think first, Monroe was really able to make connections to the staff. In comparison, as I saw Monroe be in the program for a longer period of time, they really did change and became more free in how they express themselves, both verbally and physically. So Monroe had stated they dated men from the beginning, but at some point they started expressing themselves by wearing more feminine clothes and eventually dressing in drag, as Monroe called it. So eventually Monroe formally or verbalized considering their gender identity and asked people to start calling them Erica. Sometimes Monroe went back to Monroe, sometimes it was Erica. So at that time, Monroe or Erica was more focused really on their mental health. So finding the right therapist for them was really important, more so than some of the physical aspects, when considering their gender identity, like going on hormone therapy or something like that. At that time, as some of you know, there's lots of case manager turnover. At that time, we had a really great case manager that Monroe really connected to, and they helped them really navigate their care at the time and making sure that care was supportive and affirming. So, and while Monroe was exploring or considering their gender identity and expressing and having their gender expression, this was sometimes really hard for the staff, especially over the weekend and at night, because they weren't sure how to be supportive. But I think the staff and the people in the program really wanted to be supportive of Monroe. And so they would reach out to myself or the case manager at the time with questions, and they would use staff meetings to discuss and educate. We would use staff meetings to discuss and educate each other. So fortunately, it was a welcoming and supportive environment, and people really felt they could talk if they had questions or they felt uncomfortable or wanted, to talk through something. So some of the challenges that Abby was talking about with the bathroom or showering, and our program really weren't issues because people generally had their internal policy that they could lock or close the door when they were showering or using the bathroom. And so they were really used to giving people the space and the privacy they needed in order to do the things they needed to do. So Monroe, Erica was really able to develop friendships while they were there. Their focus, again, was not on just their gender identity. It was really actually more on self-sufficiency and independence. They were really focused on being able to sustain themselves and their life on their own, far above any of the considerations around transitioning and gender identity. So Monroe, Erica worked a lot on finding a job, trying to finish their GED. Unfortunately, and our success is, they moved into their own apartment and continued because of the stability they had already accomplished in our project, really fully explored transitioning, including the medical aspects of that. They started taking hormone therapy. I think really for me, the environment that was there really allowed Monroe and Erica to explore and create the life they wanted, because there was no fear, right? There was no fear that someone would tell them no or tell them that they weren't doing what they were supposed to, and that they had the support there that they needed. I mean, the other note, not related to Monroe specifically, but specific to the project that I oversaw, is many of you feel this, we kind of had a revolving door of case managers for a long period of time. And I think, you know, understanding and seeing how people were either thriving or being free with their expression, how they were expressing themselves, was one way that I knew that the staff and any new case manager was really like building and helping affirm the environment that and the safe space that we were building. So at times, if we had a case manager or a new staff person and there was lots of discontent among the people living there and there was lots of conflict, and that was always a sign to me that this safe and supportive environment we were having, there was some problem with that or something that needed to be addressed. And so, so those are some of the ways that I would like, as a director of a program or as a supervisor, really try to see or understand that the space was safe. And I would say my like underlying hypothesis, if people in the project are thriving and are feeling free to express themselves without fear, that you're really doing many of the right things regarding a safe space. We're going to move on to the next slide after that. You all can digest that. We did want to just take a minute to touch on a brave space versus safe space. I'm sure many of you are familiar with brave spaces. We picked out a couple of definitions. There's many definitions on the internet of these two concepts. As you can see, the safe space really is about being, non-judgmental, that we're supporting people, that people are able to express themselves and exist and be affirmed without fear of any repercussions or pressure, to educate people about who they are and themselves. So learning does occur in this, but the ultimate goal is really supporting people. Whereas a brave space is really that space of dialogue, recognizing the distance and differences and holding people accountable, to share and to come to new understanding. So brave spaces are often spaces where people feel that the work is hard, that it's a feeling of uncomfortable because you're addressing and talking through really hard things. So many people believe that a safe space is not enough, that we need to have brave spaces where people are discussing. I think when Abby and I were preparing for this, we know that we want to acknowledge that for some agencies and projects and places, it's just hard enough to get to a safe space, right? And so we really think that's the first step for meaningful change. And we hope that lots of folks will get to, and making a safe space is hard as well. And it can also make people very uncomfortable. Like in the example that I gave, like lots of my staff were uncomfortable with, some of the things that they were seeing, and they needed like a space, someone with the support to talk through it. And to do that, so we'll go on to the next one. Unless someone has something to add. So we want to talk about conflict just a little bit. I put this image on here as a sign of this is not the best way for conflict resolution, although it is a way to address it, but this is not the best. There's a little touch of humor in here. On the slide, we have a few critical bullet points, like we want to focus on the aggressor and not target the person who's being harassed in order to make the changes. Conflict resolution, in my opinion, is really an art and a skill that needs regular care. So we want to ensure that people have multiple ways to address impermissible conduct, so that they have lots of tools and practice in order to do that. So conflict resolution shouldn't involve removing or expelling the victim of the harassment. So when you're creating safe spaces, we feel it is, and this feels a little repetitive, but I think it bears repeating, that we do believe you should be regularly educating staff, volunteers, people in your program about respect and equal treatment of LGBTQI2 Spirit Plus folks. Take any violence against any LGBTQI2 Spirit Plus folks seriously. And I think not just violence, but also if you're seeing or hearing frequent verbal attacks or microaggressions, like those are things to take serious too, because we don't want things escalating. We want to document violations and respond immediately. Like, we don't want to have things sit and not respond. In order to show support to people, we want to show that we're responding to things. We want to enforce our non-discrimination rules consistently in order to establish that safe space for everyone. Again, which includes the immediate investigating of any allegations of violence or harassment of folks, identifying the perpetrator, making sure that your non-discrimination rules are being followed. And those of you who are supervisors, that can be it's sometimes very challenging to untangle those allegations when you're doing that, but it's really important exercises to do that and have people and work through those challenging times. When you're creating a safe space, we don't want to ignore bullying or verbal bullying against our LGBTQ QA Two-Spirit folks, or sweep these incidents under the rug. Even if your belief is bullying is harmless, it's still harmful to them. So consistently enforcing those rules is really important for not only compliance, but for educating people. We don't want to be forcing transgender residents to appear in their sex assigned at birth. This includes children, or suggest that they need to do something to fit in or for their own safety. We don't want to engage in victim blaming, punishing, excluding, or banishing someone who's being abused or bullied or harassed. The next two, I think, are really important. Don't assume that other LGBT folks are educated about LGBT non-discrimination. So don't make that assumption that that everyone who's LGBT is an expert on LGBT non-discrimination. Also, don't assume individuals are comfortable with all LGBT folks are comfortable with other LGBT folks. As an example with my staff, like some of them really who identified as gay men really were not comfortable with transgender folks, for example. So we can't assume that that everyone's okay with everybody else. We can go on to the next one. I think, Abby, I think we did this slide already last time, but just to reiterate a few things, is like we really want to create a safe environment and to gain trust and respect. We need to show up for each other. So we need to listen to people's story. We need to take the time out to listen intentionally and actively, and making sure they have the time and the space to tell their whole story without interruptions or that we jump to conclusions. Again, and all of our skills with active listening, active asking questions, paraphrasing, seeing what kind of nonverbal cues we're seeing. We want to validate that experience, right? Especially, in any situation of prejudice, there can be a lot of unknowns. Like we don't know someone's intent. Maybe people don't realize what they said. Uncertainty makes it easier for people to feel like it's all in their head and they're making it up. So we want to take anything seriously that people are telling us. And so validation isn't a blind agreement. It just helps you understand someone's response through their lens. It's saying, I understand why you feel this way based on who you are in your history and what your experience has been. Intervene in the moment. We talked about that with conflict. We want to intervene and resolve things as quickly as possible. Last time, I think Rajni did a great example of direct, distract, delegate as tactics used. And I think the last one is being an ally, an advocate, and an activist. I think this is important to reaffirm. We need to find our own agency and our own voice that we feel comfortable, and identify how we can support and act on the behalf of people that we care about. So we work with a lot of folks in homelessness, and a lot of them really do need our support. So we have to find that place where we're comfortable being that support person and being an advocate for them. So again, allyship is support of that particular group, especially a marginalized group that you're not a member of. Advocacy is public support for a cause or movement, and activism is the social change, campaigning, protesting, and the like. Again, I think a little note of we always have to be in check with our own biases, and that our own biases can make people feel vulnerable or defensive, and we need to push through that reaction and really help them move forward. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So we did want to just take a moment to talk about resilience and affirming care. So resilience, like how do we develop this? There's, if you look on how to develop resilience, there's lots of different ways this can occur. I mean, some of the ways I think, and I say this also knowing that homeless people who've experienced homeless are incredibly resilient people at the start, right? And so, but we want to build, keep building their resilience when they're faced with harassment or discrimination or anything like that. So certain things we can do is, find our community, find who our people are, who we trust and who we feel connected to. Taking time for ourselves, our body, our mind. We help people focus on ourselves. So these are some tactics we can help people develop in order to increase their resilience and to respond after something negative may have happened to them. And then affirming care. I mean, this is the approach of healthcare or delivery in which we're looking to recognize, validate, and support the identity stated or expressed by the individual served. I think that this is why I picked the image on the right. I think these identity portraits and things like that are really visually, right? Like people have lots of things they identify with, and they may not be the things that I would look at someone and say, this is how someone identifies. So, what we really need to do is focus on and work with someone on that person level of who they are, who their community is, and which identity is most important to them, so we can connect them to the care and the support and the community they need. Because for lots of folks in the Two-spirit community, it's not necessarily that their gender identity or their sexual orientation is the community that they find most important to them and they want to be a part of. So maybe it's religion, maybe it's cultural, maybe it's things like that. Oh, and apparently I was talking too long because we only have 7 minutes left. I think we can skip the youth stuff and maybe we just stop with some questions or things that people. I don't know what to do now.
Go ahead,
Okay.
talk about, keep going.
Yes.
All right, let's go to the next one then, sorry. So again, this was from last time. People want to talk about working with youth. I just want to I'm just going to go on my 30-second soapbox. I think the term youth and communities that use transitional aged youth to talk about all of their youth this is Karen, not home-based, not ICF. I mean, those are really challenging terms for me. I think that if your community is using TAY or transitional age youth to talk about anyone under the age of 24, I think you really need to explore why that is. We know that most people under 24 who experience homelessness are not necessarily involved in the foster care system. And honestly, I would guess that most people that had foster care involvement would not want that to be their primary identity. So we've kind of been boxed in by various agencies to use terms like youth or TAY that really have turned into labels. And when we have labels, we apply them to individuals. And with that, we have certain conceptions of what that means and how people are. So it's important, I think, for us to check our own biases about the term youth and what that means in our work. I think it's real easy for folks, and I've seen this, and I check myself all the time, to fall into adultism, right? That you're putting, you're looking at someone and saying they're a youth, and then all of a sudden you're engaging in terrible adultism language with them, or how you're talking to them. So you really want, to work with. If you really want to work with people under 24, my first recommendation to people is do an adultism training. So I think it's really important for us to know ourselves and know when we're doing it, but also that we can be an ally for them and identify it in others. Because often I've seen that they, in the moment, wouldn't say anything, but then a week later they were like, I don't like so-and-so because, they said A, B, and C, which is just clear adultism. So it was challenging to just do a couple of slides in this because there's so many things we can talk about with engaging people under 24 and how to do that in the most effective way. So go to the next slide. So this is just a little, I put the article, the report that I took this from, but this is just a little idea about building relationships, because in my experience, and I was not in any way a provider that focused on youth or people under the age of 24. When I was working in direct service, like for HIV, our definition of youth, if you will, was more like under 27 or under 30. So, I think having that numeric part is really challenging, but I think, in my experience, it's all about relationship building. And I think that some of the toughest but the most rewarding relationships I've made with people under 24, like they take a lot of work, but it's so worth it because they're really some of the smartest, most insightful people to change your homeless system that you can find. So I just wanted to share a couple of these thoughts about engagement. So here in this quote, engagement is building a relationship. And there's these kind of 6 elements. Trust. Trust is very complicated. We gain that through genuine, consistent, dependable, and transparent interactions. It's reciprocal, right? We both need to take chances on each other to develop trust. Safety is a central part of trust. We know that trauma is a huge part of the lives of many young people that we work with, and is a huge factor in safety. So to create safety, we need to understand each other, and not necessarily in terms of right or wrong. Because of trauma, what I think is right may not be the same, because of my past trauma, may not be the same thing as you think is right. So we need to understand each other and how we can create that safe and trusting place, and not just say this is right or this is wrong, because our experiences are so different. And that's how we can move towards safety. So respect, as we know, is central to any relationship. This is where our accepting, respectful, non-judgmental mental attitude comes in, that we're viewing and accepting the whole person. We understand our biases and how they're coming into play when we're developing that relationship. Boundaries, another challenge in our work. So respecting a young person is respecting their boundaries. And we all struggle with boundaries. We struggle with setting them. We struggle with keeping them. Discussing boundary issues is really important, so everyone's consistent and transparent about what they mean. Cultural humility, so relationships with trust, safety, respect, those are all built on cultural humility. So cultural humility is a set of beliefs and experiences, expectations that an individual exists in, or how we exist. And then power, the last one, we need to individually, but also that our organizations and our projects and agencies remedy any power imbalances to build a stronger relationship with youth. So if this can be you can see this by viewing youth as the experts of their own lives, incorporating their input and respecting their boundaries. So I just want to do a quick little, these are some of the things that the ingredients to a good relationship with youth. I'm not sure that answered the question of whoever asked that, but I thought we'd pause and talk about.
Chime in really fast?
Yeah.
I was the one who had asked to, touch on the youth. Are there special considerations when it comes to working with children, in your opinion, when it comes to, with under 18, especially, like when to involve parents or when not to, and how to approach that? Like, should they go to their parents? I guess, I don't know if that's making a lot of sense. I guess that falls under boundaries or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say my experience is not necessarily in the under 18, with the under 18 crowd. I think that, if your role, I think you mentioned you're doing a lot of outreach as an outreach worker, is developing a relationship of trust. I think you have to explore whether to involve their parents. There's lots of legal issues with working with people under 18, and I don't want to misadvise you of those things. But I think that if you're focusing on relationship building, I'm not sure what the right answer to that is. And again, lots of, they may have a very precarious either relationship with their biological parents or whoever they may be living with. So
I guess I'm asking because of a specific encounter I had with a young person who you know, just didn't have the greatest relationship with, you know, her parents, and had to be one way around at home and one way somewhere else. And I just didn't know. I didn't know how to. I just listened, and I said, you know, that sounds really tough, but I mean, is that a situation I should encourage? I don't know, them to like talk to someone, or that was a tough situation to be in. Like, I didn't know what else to say, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the, I mean, I would say that's an, and if other people want to weigh in, I would welcome that. I mean, I think that's a common challenge, right? Because you're working with folks who have experienced trauma, right? Even at a very young age. And you know, one of the best things we can do with folks experiencing trauma is listen to them, and we'll give them the space that someone can to talk through or tell their story in a non-judgmental way. That doesn't mean that you have to solve that for them, or you have to, you know, provide them with case management or therapy or any of those things. Like, sometimes it's best to listen and then, you know, tell them that, see if they want help from somewhere else, and then help like direct them to the best folks to assist them. So there's a lot, like, I mean, that was a very long non-answer, but sometimes the best we can do is just to listen, right? And then try to see what they want their next step to be, and if we can help connect them, because you know, like, and folks in like shelters and different projects, like sometimes the security people are the ones who are hearing lots of, like, you know, stories from people, and then, but they're not the person who's best equipped to like assist them into the next step or the next thing that they need. So I think from a like basic perspective, listening to them is probably one of the best things you can do, because they probably are in search of someone just to listen in a non-judgmental way.
Thank you. You know, so you feel like you should be doing something, but I guess it's good to hear listening is plenty sometimes.
I think that's so true. It's hard because we can't do everything for every person, right? And so like sometimes, and that's hard because we want to help people, and we're helpers by nature, and we're in this work because we want to assist people. And that's, so I think everything you're feeling and all your concerns are perfectly, you know, right, and accurate for what's, you know, for what that situation was for you. Like, and that's the hard part lots of us get into a lot of the time.
Thank you.
So I mean, we could take down the slides. I'm not even sure what time zone I'm in or what time it is where what this is left. So if you have other questions or comments on youth, we can do that first for a couple minutes, and then
Yeah, we've got about 15 minutes left in the session
right.
that are available to us for all Q&A.
Thanks, Kristen. Sorry that I lost track of time.
Oh, no, that was great.
Catalina, do you want to, I see your hand up. Do you want to?
Hello, my name is Catalina Zambrano. I'm the Advocacy Director for an LGBT center here in Modesto, California. I don't know if maybe this could be a help, but the one thing that we've kind of come into as an issue is some of our members that come to our center, well, a couple of them have reported sexual assault inside of their shelter. This is more for adult, not for youth, or for sexual assault by staff members. And because they had been, these are transgender individuals, and because they had been sex workers, right? And they were trying to get their life better and get off the streets, because they had already had that on them. If people knew them of that, the staff member, one in particular, would, sexual assault them in the restroom. And then when they went to go take it to staff, right, or the higher ups, the staff pretty much was like, yeah, we'll talk to them, and then ended up just putting a Post-it note on a computer where the rest of the staff was able to see what the report was, or just like, hey, so and so reported sexual assault, please get back to them. And then at the end of it, instead of it being escalated or police involvement being called, the higher ups pretty much said, if you want to continue to stay here, you'll have to sign this and pretend like this never happened. And so, and this is multiple times this has happened. So my question is there something else that we can do as a case manager, as an advocacy to, we've tried to call in the police, and the police did go and talk to individuals, but when upper staff pretty much says this never happened, what do we do? You know, where do we go? You know, and then it is a faith-based organization, you know, but when the staff won't even, you know, acknowledge that this individual was, you know, or actually at one instance, they had even said that said individual had pretty much propositioned this staff member. So that's where my head is kind of being banged against the wall. Like, what can we do?
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you, Karen?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, well, we'll see how long that lasts. Catalina, first of all, my God. My first instinct goes to grievance process. That if the organization does not have a grievance process that has security, privacy, and fidelity to standards, or fidelity to, you know, an actual rigorous review, that this would be something that I, as an advocate or staff person, would escalate to the continuum of care, who has to have a grievance process. That's where I would take it. But also, I think that given the severity of this, I mean, this is, I'm not in the business of parsing trauma, but this is a severe.
Oh. Maybe we kind of lost you there. So I don't know where Abby was going with the severe piece, but when you feel your connection's better, yeah, Catalina, this is a severe and egregious, and I mean, I would agree, I would concur with Abby that like one next avenue is to go to the continuum of care, and they should have some sort of grievance process. You know, not knowing how things are in Modesto and that system, like I would hope they would hear a grievance, even if that particular faith-based shelter may not be like directly as part of the continuum of care, though they may be, but you found us. So I mean,
Yeah,
that would be
so
next, yeah.
well, we, you know, the one thing that we have a really good, really good, well manicured kind of a relationship with our law enforcement in town, who is exceptional with LGBT and wanting to better themselves. But the one thing that we had to end up doing, number one, was of course take care of that said individual, and you know, until they felt safe enough to even want to further anything, right? But the one thing that we ended up doing was making sure that we did call the chief of police, and we, the only way we were able to actually get stuff done was, you know, get a hold of chief police. They sent down an individual, an officer was able to take that report, and it was with only that we were able to even get the name of the individual that sexually assaulted them, and that was only through interviewing a security officer, right? And it was frustrating. It was very frustrating because even then they were like, well, there's not much we can do unless you know, said individual wants to press charges, but this individual has no other places to go, you know, for shelter. So they were very afraid to lose their bed, and so they wouldn't. It was like a big old sticky mess. So we were able to get long-term shelter for them elsewhere. But my fear again is, yes, this continuing, and to my knowledge, this employee, this staff member, is still actively working there. So that's one of them. Another situation is that we've seen that a lot of LGBT individuals, especially within shelters, with staff, they end up being on a shorter leash, I guess you would have to say. We've we've given them trainings on how to better understand LGBT individuals, but what ends up happening is they have to take them, correct? But they don't have to keep them. And we've had more and more times that we've had individuals who had gone to stay there who have finally reacted to the bad treatment that they received there from either staff member or other residents. And nothing had been done towards the residents, right? And that had harassed them or discriminated against them, misgendered them and all that. But because said individual had reacted, finally had said something back, they have been automatically exited out. And it came off to us as they're just exiting them out quickly so they don't have to deal with them. Right. And so that's another thing, like this, these are kind of like the small things. There's 2 shelters that we have in our town. One is faith-based, the other is faith-based, but more open to everything. And we started moving everybody over there. But the other one, it gets to a point where you're like, what do you do? Like how can we talk to these individuals? I was involved in their training that they had for LGBT, and none of them actually even cared to be there. So I don't know. Sorry, I guess I'm more ranting than anything, but I appreciate. Thank you. If there's any help you guys can help me with.
No, Kelly and we want this to be a space if people need to rant, that's acceptable. I think those things that you're talking about are really severe and egregious. I mean, I think that, yeah, again, I mean, I feel like there's not the best mechanism. I mean, I would think that shelter should, like Abby mentioned, should have a grievance policy. And any time that you feel that a person feels their exit is unwarranted, they should be able to grieve with that. And if the shelter isn't listening, then you would kick that up to the COC level, documenting those things and keeping track of that. I know someone in the chat said, shelters you're absolutely right. Shelters often need permits or licenses to function. So and Gabrielle, I don't know if you want to come off mute, but there may be a course through the city of Modesto with that, with these, acts of discrimination as well. But
yeah. So I work for the city of San Jose, and I used to be a council assistant, right? So every time there was an issue out in the community, we always had community members meeting with the council member to let them know about specific issues. And I know that the council member would take these issues and sometimes, pursue certain avenues that were unconventional. And that's why I suggested, if permits are required by this program from the city, then, this could possibly be an avenue to pursue, if, say, maybe the council member is contacted and then they contact the different departments and let them know, hey, there's some issues that need to be addressed. I don't know. I'm just brainstorming here. So,
Yeah, Gabriella, the other thing, I'll see how long I can talk before I cut out. The other thing that I was going to say is it helps to invest in relationships with city officials, local journalists, anyone with a public mouthpiece, and also why it's so important to have LGBTQIA Two-Spirit plus advocates who aren't working in the shelters or getting their funding from the same people who shelters are getting their funding from, because you can act as an advocate, truly, to push back on things like this.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Appreciate all your work you're doing, Catalina, with them. It's really great. Kristen, I just want to check on the time. It looks like we have 4 minutes. Do we have time for another question or comment from someone?
Yeah, I think we have time for another question, and then we'll just move into the final slides after that.
Great. Unless, Abby, was there something else we needed to?
We have a poll that I want to finish with, and it should be very quick. So,
Okay. Let's see if someone else has a comment or a question or thing they want to share. Well, hearing none, but if people have have things they want to put in the chat, that's fine. I think we can launch the poll then. Kristen.
And Marion, if you wouldn't mind bringing the slides back up, that would
Oh, yeah, we
be
can do that.
appreciated. Thank you, Marion.
I think we're on 28, Miriam.
Yeah, we've got a, yes, exactly.
Next one, I'm sorry. Those numbers are off. Okay. And then, Kristen, this is a poll we're launching.
Yep, we will be launching this poll. Abby, did you want to give an intro to it? And Marion, next slide, please.
Sure. We are just hoping, this is the third in a series of workshops that we designed specifically for staff and supervisors who are working with folks. We just want to get a temperature check of, how much new, how much revisited. So if you can just pick the category that best fits your experience of these, we would appreciate it. Helps us dial in.
We've got answers rolling in. We're at about 50% participation, but I know we can get higher. Okay, slowing down there a little, Abby. Do you want me to close the poll out?
Yeah, thank you. This is great. So, thank you. This tells us that we did hit the mark that we were hoping for in the workshops. If you have anything that you really appreciated or did not appreciate about these, please feel free to convey that. Kristen, I'm going to admit that I'm not totally clear where folks would do that though.
There's going to be a survey that pops up at the end of our session, and that would be a great place to do it.
Okay. I know that it's annoying to do those, but they really do help us. Thank you. We can stop sharing the poll. And if you can go to the next slide, Marion. Oh, one more. Thank you. Not sure if I'm still cutting out or not, but we have one workshop left, incorporating underrepresented perspectives, and we are really excited for it. Rajni Shankar Brown is going to be the primary deliverer of the content, and that'll be next Thursday. So we hope to see you there. And with that, I think we're done.
Yeah. Next slide, please, Marion, and I'll go ahead and close us out. So just wanted to thank you for attending this California Housing and Community Development training session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. This session and over a dozen other trainings will be posted on the California HCD website that you can view at your leisure, and those links will be sent out in the follow-up email. There will be a short 3-question survey that will pop up when you close the training window. We would really appreciate your feedback so we know what sessions and topics to offer in the future. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. Thank you so much to Karen and Abby and to Marion for moving the slides. And we hope that everybody has a wonderful day today. Thank you.
Thank you.